All right, and so it begins. Come on, everybody. I'm gonna give a few minutes to allow the peeps to filter through, but what's going down? Just gotta say I hope everybody is having a safe, healthy quarantine. If you're still in the midst of any of that craziness, I definitely am, unfortunately. But I'm just letting this crazy beard grow, seeing where the hell that's gonna go. It's been constant comment of craziness from people about it, but yeah. Malito Paso, buddy, what the hell is going on, man? Good to see you. And yes, we will allow peeps to filter back through. I hope the volume levels are going to be okay. I will attempt to project as best I can, but yeah, still having that microphone issue, regrettably, with the main one that I had been using for a while there. And yeah, I'm very, very much looking forward to this discussion. And yeah, I guess we'll just see as that. My dude, what's going on, Mikey? How are you, man? Chris Bethel, good to see you as well there, good sir. Here with what's up? Here with Aries. What's up, Aries? It's going down. Awesome name, gotta say. Now let me get this properly posted on the social medias and stuff to make sure people actually can get the link. And then we will get to rolling about this awesome collection of short stories, many of which I hadn't even reread in quite a while, actually. So there's certain ones that I always go back and I revisit, and you know, from time to time, stuff like The Raft and obviously The Mist. And there's even been like full-on episodes that I've done covering specific stories here. So Mark Pearson, Heil, what's going on, man? Good to see my peeps from across the pond. I'm always happy when I can try to do these much earlier than a typical horror show stream, because I know it's so much later for you guys over on the other side of the world. We got Tony T jumping through. How's it going in Fuego? What's going on, Tony? Thanks so much for cruising through for a little bit. It is supremely appreciated. Skip this stupid ad. Facebook and their ads drive me absolutely bonkers crazy. I'm sure they do much the same for you guys. All right, so share to the social medias. And we will get to rolling. So I'm actually curious. So for anybody, Ray Kelly, what's going on, yo? Very positive members of the YOU the Ka-Tet. And I got to go. Corey's on there as well. Dave Edmonds. Never too late for you, Jaime. Hey, I appreciate that greatly, Dave. Gracias, brother. Okay, Corey Novak. I used to love her, but you see my shirt, brah. Yeah, this is a raggedy one that's been around the Fuego parts for quite a while now. But yeah, I hope everybody is doing good. I'm actually curious more so than anything if this was the first time read for certain people, or if you were already just super familiarized with most of these. It's not quite as like renowned as Night Shift, I guess, as far as like just the most iconic King properties and ones that have had adaptations and stuff like that. But I'm just curious if anybody is in that camp. All right, live skeleton crew. This is where having a co-host does definitely help, but this being a one-man show, I appreciate y'all's patience because we're going to get rocking here in just a quick moment. Stephen King Anniversary Live. Okay. Yeah, I actually rewatched The Mist last night, and my lady had not seen it, and she claimed she'd watched it before, but she had just got done reading the novella, and so we were like, yeah, let's watch the movie. And so we watched The Mist. And then we also watched the Raft segment from Creepshow 2 last night, which was actually filmed here in Arizona, which is pretty dope status. Okay, live skeleton crew, Stephen King anniversary discussion now. Bam! I'm stoked. And one thing I was thinking though, guys, is that okay, paste. Can you paste you Sun Beach? Ugh. Yep, I better turn that volume down. Don't want that interfering. Okay. Now, the one thing that did occur to me, though, everybody, is that I was looking back at when we covered Night Shift on this program a couple of years ago, I think, for that collection's anniversary. And I did, like, I think 5 or 6 separate episodes. So I only covered a couple stories at a time. So that's where, in some ways, I feel like I'm shortchanging Skeleton Crew a little bit unnecessarily, because I gave so much just in-depth, just intense discourse about Night Shift. And with 22 stories in this, technically 2 of them are very, very brief. But, you know, I'm going to do my best to be as comprehensive as possible. And I look forward to starting this up right now because it's been a few minutes now. And I am, I think, good to go. So posted schmossum. And yeah, I guess we're set to blow out your eardrums, peeps. All right, here we go. Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower behind me as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hey-O! Get away from the microphone to Stephen King. Gracias, everybody, for tuning in. It is supremely appreciated. I am humbled and honored to be sharing this palaver with all of you. And we have the awesome opportunity currently to get down and dirty. That's right. Some intense discourse all about Skeleton Crew. That's right. Skeleton Crew was released 35 years ago this upcoming June. But so we do this book of the month thing on Hail to Stephen King, which is also a Facebook group as well. So it's really one of the only things that gets me on Facebook aside from Mikey Mnemonic's memes. But really, we do this monthly thing, and I don't always have like a voting system in place for that with the near 800 people that are on there. But occasionally, there are certain months that are just loaded with these golden anniversaries. So if it's either an increment or 5 or 10 years, that's typically when I give the distinction that it is time to do an anniversary review of something. And over 3 years now that I've been doing this program, I've slowly worked through a good chunk of King's work. For anybody who is just randomly tuning into this program, over the course of over 7 years, I read through every single Stephen King book in the published order. So I started with Carrie, even though I had already read stuff like Pet Sematary and It and The Stand. I was like, once I realized everything connected, I wanted to just start from the very beginning and get all of those juicy little Easter eggs and connected tidbits and stuff like that. It seemed like something that was really cool and really important. And so therefore I went forward with that crazy undertaking. And so the thing about that, though, is that as I was mentioning off the air, because I always try to edit these down to just the actual episode once the live portion is finished. But before the show officially started, I was talking with a few of the people that were first filtering in that there's a lot of stories here that I've revisited. So, for instance, I'm not going to go super in-depth about The Mist. I'm going to talk briefly about it. But I did a whole episode about The Mist where I covered the original novella, the audio drama that came out in the 90s, the television, television series, which was just a couple years ago and was pretty crappy, although it did have some interesting aspects. Different level of the tower, different turn of the wheel, everybody, just to keep that in mind. And then also the iconic film, which I just rewatched last night, and I rewatched it in black and white, which is Darabont's recommended version of it. And the funny thing is, King even says it. That's one great thing about this collection is I love when King has these forewords and then he has like afterwards. And the afterwards in this one, unfortunately, you don't get them in the Audible or the audiobook, with, whatever your destination for listening to King stuff is. And he gives these little interesting like postscript kind of stuff all about the different stories. Not all of them, but like a good chunk of them. And one thing he says about The Mist that I find very, very interesting is he's like, where is it? He's like, I must tell you that I also like the metaphor implied in David Drayton's discovery of his own limitations, and I like the story's cheery cheesiness. And this is the specific part, which is why I recommend to watch The Mist in black and white if you have that deluxe DVD or Blu-ray, because he says, you're supposed to see this one in black and white with your arm around your girl's shoulders or your guy's, and a big speaker stuck in the window. You make up the second feature. The reason he says you make up the second feature is because The Mist notoriously ends very open-ended, and King has even gone on record to say that he prefers the ending that Frank Darabont came up with. And yeah, spoilers, it's a pretty brutal one with David killing himself and the other three, his son, and then the other 3 passengers in that vehicle, only to have the military roll through and save the day, so to speak. So it does give more of an essence of finality, and it's much more satisfying than just the, I'm writing this all down and who knows what's going to happen sort of open-endedness that King even mentions at the end of the story. Like, his character is like, this is the kind of ending to the story that my father would probably criticize as one of those Hitchcock endings that, doesn't really explain or answer much and blah, blah, blah. So the Mist film is fantastic. But once again, we're not here to talk about the adaptations necessarily, although I did also watch the Creepshow 2 segment, The Raft, which is my favorite segment in any creep show of all of the creep shows, including the television series that just hit recently. The Raft is badass. The effects are gruesome. And credit to Savini. But that story I'm really looking forward to talking about as well. We also know Grandma got an adaptation on the new Twilight Zone in the 80s. So I also did a video about that short story and the couple adaptations that we've had. We had this movie called Mercy that had Chandler Briggs or whatever his name is. Carl! That's right, from The Walking Dead, if you're going to talk about more Darabont connections and stuff. But so I did a whole video about Grandma already. I also did a video about Word Processor of the Gods and the adaptation that we had on Tales from the Dark Side of that one. So those are a couple stories that I'm going to more so graze over for the stuff that I feel like needs some real attention, like the Jaunt, for instance, or Mrs. Todd's Shortcut, or The Reach. My 5 favorite stories from this. I'm not going to do a full ranking. I saw some people on the Hail to Stephen King group that were actually doing that. They're like, I'm going to rank all of the Skeleton Crew stories. I encourage all of you to do that if you're part of the Facebook group. And if you're not, I'm the sole admin and moderator on there. So just jump over, give a request. The only specification is that we keep it King and his family related. So we do talk about Joe Hill. We've occasionally discussed Tabby and Owen a little bit. But and then on Fridays we have like kind of a Friday freak out of sorts where you can discuss other topics, because I know we've all found a cool kef with each other and friendships, in various manners as well. So that's where we give the opportunity to just like blow it all up. And I've actually been thinking about just adding a second day, because I know as the group continues to grow, there is just probably a lot of other non-King related topics, whether it's horror or, something else that y'all might be interested in discussing. And I think as the group gets closer to 1,000 people, that, maybe having a Manic Monday and the Freak Out Friday, just to give you 2 opportunities to do that, might be a little bit cooler. So, with all of that in mind, I'm going to take a brief look once again at the group chat before we get really into this, because, guys, I've got notes and more notes and more notes. And so there's a lot of fun shizzle to discuss, and I'm very much looking forward to it. But first off, I'm going to do my best briefly to give according shout outs to all of the peeps that are cruising through here on this fine Saturday in May. Okay, who else do we got rolling in? I already mentioned Chris Bethel, Malito, Mikey, KP Metal. Skeleton Crew is my favorite collection, although Night Shift is close behind. It is. I have found a renewed appreciation for it, in all honesty, because I haven't revisited some of these stories in probably 6 or 7 years since I read the collection in its entirety. And I also listened to it as well this time. So I read and I listened. And the Audible has some terrific narrators. It really does. Stephen King himself reads The Raft, which is really dope. But Michael C. Hall, the guy who played Dexter, he narrates 2 of them and does a fantastic job. Paul Giamatti does a couple of them, which is really great. Matthew Broderick does the monkey. So you've got some legit voice talent that brings these stories to life. And in some ways, I actually found myself gaining a new appreciation for a couple of these stories by listening to them that I didn't necessarily have upon the initial couple reads of this collection. Because like I said, it's been a while since I've read a few of these stories. So let's keep cruising. Canto 1408, Skeleton Crew is my personal favorite of the King collections, at least of what I've read. Hell yes, we are seeing a lot of love for Skelly Crew. Zach, a little patience. Yeah, everyone's digging the shirt. That's what's up. All right. Watching The Stranger on HBO right now. Maybe Ray D meant The Outsider. I'm not completely sure. Did your lady enjoy the end of The Mist? She enjoyed the end of the film much more so. She was kind of bugged by the end of the book itself. Love the shirt, Fuego. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate the love from my GNR. Okay, hope you're well. That says Andrew Cooper. I'm in the middle of the Institute currently, and I have the second Dark Tower book coming in the mail. That's what's up. Okay, yes, Robert. Miss you, Sir Duel. Hope all is good with you, man, and that we get the proper crew together soon. Okay, who else? Daniel Corey is making an appearance. Another cornerstone at this point of the Hail Ka-Tet. What is going on, good sir? Thanks very much for dropping in for a quick minute if you don't have too much time. Okay. Jared Martinez, The Jaunt was my favorite short story from this collection besides the Mist, of course. Yeah, I hadn't read The Jaunt in a while, and I remember the specifics of it, but having like kind of re-embraced my geeky sci-fi-ness over the last like couple of years, I don't think I appreciated it as much the last time I read it in comparison with this time, because this time I loved the hell out of it. I thought it was awesome. Okay, Nona is pretty good too. Yeah, Nona is one that I also look forward to covering. It's got a very strange creepiness to it, and with the rat stuff going on. Okay, I don't understand why people don't like the ending of the novella. I think, Canto, the biggest criticism of the ending of the novella is because it's so open-ended, and King even unabashedly admits that Darabont's ending is the superior one in his estimation. For my money, it's actually one of the few times where I think somebody improved on the source material. There's only a few times that that's happened with King stuff, and I'd say at least two of them are Darabont. You know, I mean, Flanagan has improved on the work a little bit. I don't know. It's obviously debatable, and as I always contend on this program, art is subjective, and there are some people who adore certain things, and they can't understand why other people don't have a similar appreciation. It's just personal taste, you know? Okay. Alexander, is the rap the same story done on Creepshow too? Yes, it is, sir. And Alexander actually had a really dope suggestion in the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group the other day. He actually said that I should do a countdown on this program of favorite audio versions of stuff, since I've read all of these books before. And when I'm just re-embracing them for reviews and stuff like this and taking another examination, I always read and I listen. So I double down and I do both. And yeah, just a countdown maybe of favorite narrators is more so what I was thinking, because you've got guys like Will Patton who've done fantastic work, various others, and he's just one of the first names that comes to mind because he's done a lot of King's recent work. He did the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, he did The Outsider, he did some stuff, obviously for If It Bleeds, you know, with Holly's Return. So shout out to Alexander for giving that dope suggestion. And that's what I have an immense production list, everybody, of show ideas, and I always take as many suggestions into note as possible. It's like a 2-page document of just all kinds of ideas, upcoming anniversaries of books, television series, films, stuff like that. So I try to keep this show, even over 3 years in, as comprehensive as possible, but something I really try to strive to do as well is to make it as interactive as possible, which is why I'm stoked that these Book of the Month things have gone over fairly well. And that's really would be nothing without all of you. So, you know, that goes without saying. But Skeleton Crew is one of the first books I read by Stephen King, and this particularly, along with The Jaunt. Yeah, lots of love for The Jaunt, man. That is definitely one that I have noticed is one of those unsung heroes. And last I heard, Andy Muschietti and his sister, they're trying to get a adaptation of it produced. So they're like, he's not directing or anything. The guy who did Mama, and then obviously the 2 It films. But so him and his sister, who was his production partner, you know, producing partner of sorts, they're trying to get it made. But that's one, for my money, it needs a budge, man. It needs a budget, needs some money to make The Jaunt. And I would imagine that's probably why it hasn't happened yet. So, okay. I think I'm just about caught up, and I know that trying not to take an immense amount of everybody's time, even though I appreciate the hell out of it, all of your presence here and stuff. My favorite short here is probably The Raft. Love that one. Also my favorite Creepshow, Second Fuego. Yeah, damn right, man. The Raft is dope and gross and strange, and just the way that it's there's aspects about the adaptation of The Raft that I prefer, like that ending, and then there's also stuff that you know, just the description of Deke's death in the short story is slow and disgustingly gruesome. And I was just like, wow, King, you don't really write much like this, buddy. I think people like the ambiguity of the Mist ending. Stephen King said that it would have been kind of a cheap ending to just say that the mist lifted and all the monsters went away. Yeah, and that's, you know, to Jared's point, King even mentions it in the afterward stuff that I was mentioning. Oh, and also there's a terrific foreword in this version of the book as well. I'm not sure if it's in like all the paperbacks and everything, but he talks about his love for the short form and how it poses different challenges for him in comparison. And I will contend that whereas lots of people talk smack about him not being able to end his novels always very well, I'd say more often than not, Stephen King's short stories end much more satisfyingly, which is one of the reasons why I always get really pumped when he's putting out not a novella collection like we just got, but a short collection, you know, like much more easily digestible little like horror bites of sorts. I dig that sort of stuff. I didn't get the Jaunt until I listened to it. Oh, okay, yeah. So Aries from Chris Bethel here says, I didn't get the Jaunt until I listened to it. Yeah, and there's often going to be stories where you have to almost have somebody read it to you, and I've noticed this more and more as I get into more audible audiobook and stuff like that. Sometimes just hearing the storyteller like tell it to you and like just give the proper inflection, you know, and pronounce things in a certain way, and the rate of speech, like how they deliver certain sentences, all of that stuff really helps to understand things a whole lot better. Plus, that's a dense story as far as the fact that it's futuristic and it talks about an alternate Earth history. And so there's a lot to like kind of wrap your head around, so to speak there. So, okay. Well, I definitely have to get this going at some particular point, but the chat is engaging and really dope. When will the Gunslinger be book of the month? That is a good question, Mark. I've actually been trying to, I've been trying to get my lady Catherine, who was in the chat right there. I'm trying to get her into the Tower books, but obviously that's a massive undertaking. I've been missing the Ka-Tet, man. I've been missing Roland because I did so much coverage in 2017 with the movie coming up and everything. And then I also did my Dark Tower panel that year at the Phoenix Comic-Con that I curated and, you know, basically put together myself, and had some awesome guests, like Cecil was a part of that. A couple other Dark Tower experts sat in as well. So I don't know. It has to happen soon. The tough thing is that there's still so many other things on the plate that I don't know. Maybe it has to happen. It has to happen at some particular point. So, okay, so we are all caught up, and we need to get going. But what I have decided I'm actually going to do for this particular discussion is, as opposed to going in the order of the book, and that's something that I really wanted to ask all of you, and maybe you can have some chatter about it as we're going through everything here. What are your thoughts on like specific sequencing in short story collections? Do you really think it has that much of a basis and a bearing? The reason I ask is because this time I didn't read everything in order like I did the previous time. I actually read everything in the published order. So I went back onto the wiki and I made a master list of when everything was published here. And so that's the order that we're actually going to go in here. And so June of 1985 was when this was initially published, but then in October of 85, there was a Scream Press special edition that was done that also had illustrations and added the Revelations of Becca Paulson, which was later published separately in a couple other collections, and then it was folded into the Tommyknockers. So that's like one of those weird lost Sai King stories, and it's actually one that I did a separate video specifically about. That was also adapted into a episode of TV as well, so just something to keep in mind there. But then PS Publishing did a 30th anniversary edition 5 years ago that I have been trying to track down. It's expensive, though. That's the problem. But it is pristine and badass looking, and it's got illustrations, and there's two different versions of the cover. The version of the cover that I prefer is the one tied in with the raft, and it's just this gross drawing of like the black oil slick like going over this person and eating their face away. It's sick. It's sick, I gotta say. But yeah, so I'm actually, in this reread, I did everything in the order of, as I said, when it was published. So first and foremost, we have to talk about the story that King did when he was just 18 years old, and it was published in Startling Mystery Stories in the spring of 1969, and that's Reaper's Edge. Reaper's Edge is a very simple little story, and yet I like it. It's effective, you know? I mean, there's a couple cool lines in here, like the only way to talk to a fool was to ignore him, and that's because the story is very simple. It's this like antique collector going to this eccentric guy's home, and he's trying to purchase this mirror that has a notorious distinction for people, certain people, not everybody, but certain people looking into it and seeing the Grim Reaper in it, and then turning around and dying shortly thereafter. Very simple concept. It feels like something that would have been on, like, I don't know, the Twilight Zone back in the 60s, or in one of those EC comics that King adored so much. And yeah, it's a predictable story. You see where it's going. And I was really curious, more so than anything else, about if King revised it for this collection or if it really was just in its previously published form, because it shows a sense of sophistication that, despite being like 5 pages, is far beyond King at the age of 18, or at least I would assume, because like the other 2 stories that come right after Reaper's Image. And so that's the thing. There's not really much to discuss about Reaper's Image aside from the fact that I enjoyed it in its simplicity and it showed promise. Now, the story, the other story, Here There Be Tigers, this is one I don't like. I'll be honest. I'm not super fond of it because it's just kind of silly and illogical in my estimation. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just, it feels more so to me like a kid daydreaming at school. He has this teacher who kind of picks on him anytime he has to go to the bathroom. Bathroom, basement. I'm assuming the connotation there, and this one was actually published in, I believe it's Ubris, if I remember correctly, which was, which in the spring of 1968, which is also when the other one we're going to discuss right after was published. But Here There Be Tigers it's just a very simple story about this kid who is teased, and the connotation between bathroom and basement is, I'm assuming, like kids are scared to go in the basement, and like for whatever reason this kid has a phobia of going to the bathroom, basement. That's really the only connection I can make there. And really, it's like, there's a tiger in the bathroom, and then for whatever reason there's a tiger in the bathroom, and it in turn proceeds to eat classmate that's teased him, and then the teacher. And I don't know, I don't hate it, but I'm not a fan. It feels kind of juvenile to me. I guess that's really the only thing that I can say. Now, the story thereafter, okay, and this was also published when he was in college in the spring of 1968. This is called Cain Rose Up. And this is a disturbing story. It's very disturbing. And this is one that would have trouble flying in this day and age. I know there was a Dollar Baby that was made about this. And it's essentially about a kid on like the last day of finals and everybody's going home and stuff. He just decides to pick up a rifle and start shooting kids in like the concourse area out there. Specifically, I think he starts opening fire on like the girls' like courtyard area. And he does have an interesting phrase that he admits here, though. He's like, you either ate the world or the world ate you, and it was okay either way. And he's talking with his Humphrey Bogart like poster that he has, but the kid is obviously totally nuts. And this is where I had planned on actually reading a passage from this. It's where is it? No. I did make it in the notes, and it was a very interesting and prolific thing. And whereas I didn't care for Here There Be Tigers, there is some good writing in this as well. So the last paragraph here this is where he's talking. Our character Garish is talking to Humphrey Bogart, who he calls Bogey, which is really funny to me. But he's like, let me tell you something, Garish told Bogey. God got mad at Cain because Cain had an idea. God was a vegetarian. His brother knew better. God made the world in his image, and if you don't eat the world eats you. So Cain says to his brother, why didn't you tell me? And his brother says, why didn't you listen? And Cain says, okay, I'm listening now. So he waxes his brother and says, hey, God, you want meat? Here it is. You want roast or ribs or Abel burgers or what? And God told him to put on his boogie shoes. So what do you think? No reply from Bogey. I don't know. That is the iconic phrase from this story, but it's got some similarities to Rage in that regard. It's got some similarities to the Apt Pupil that came out a few years later and what that kid does at the end. So as far as this trio of early King as a kid stories, pretty much that we get in various parts of this collection, Cain Rose Up is definitely the most effective, but I have trouble praising it because it's just so disturbing in an era of the sort of violence that we're seeing, not just here in the States, man, but across the world, and horrible shootings and stuff like that. I mean, God, it's tough to stomach. So let's continue forward and let's get to the aforementioned Nona. Nona was published in the Shadows collection in 1978, and Nona is very, very dreamlike and strange, and it's got some Lovecraftian vibes to it, and the fact that it's being told from the perspective of this guy who has been convicted of multiple murders, and he is basically recounting his experience with meeting this woman named Nona when he was hitchhiking back after deciding to leave the college that he was working at. And so he's in this he's in this like truck stop place where it gives you big time Easy Rider vibes, where he's got long hair and stuff, and they just immediately start giving him crap, and they're like, oh, Jesus is in here, and blah, blah, blah. And I think of the scene in Easy Rider where those good old boy truckers are going after, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper's characters. And I think Jack Nicholson is already with them, but he doesn't really have long hair like those two dudes in that movie. And so he's got this trucker who starts a fight with him just as he's trying to talk to this girl that he just describes her as being, she was exquisite. It's the only word in the English language there to describe her, and how her hair is so black it's almost blue. And I mean, he goes into just very interesting, in-depth description. Sorry, my mouth is getting a little bit dry. But he goes into this very in-depth, interesting description of this woman, and just this haunting and yet alluring beauty of her. But it turns very quickly after he beats the living hell out of this truck driver. It's like a switch is flipped, and he's got the rage, but he's also trying to impress this girl, and they leave together. And it turns into a Bonnie and Clyde type situation, and they are going around. They kill a number of people in succession, and basically it ends up with them in Castle Rock, if I recall correctly, which is where Kid grew up. And you get a lot of sad information about this kid's backstory, and how he's depressingly orphaned, how he gains a distrust of women following this heartbreak. And this heartbreak comes from this girl that he's like, what is it that he says? I could have sworn I had, okay, yeah, this is what I was looking for. He describes it as, and he's, for a while it was love, then it was like love, then it was over. And as somebody who has experienced, love and the heartbreak associated with it, it hit home and just gave me that sort of recollection, and kind of keeping in touch with somebody. And he talks about how this love of his ends up with this other guy, and then she's going to get married to him, and yet they still talk. And she's like, do you want to come to the wedding? And he's just like, why would I do that? It's just such a strange symbiotic situation. And we also get the first appearance here of Ace Merrill, which is a big thing to note, because as a teenager, he basically has the hots for Ace Merrill's girl in Castle Rock. And Ace gets wind of it, and Ace ends up putting one on him. And so 4 years before we got different seasons and we got the body, we were initially introduced to Ace Merrill here, who would go on to be obviously in the body / Stand By Me, the adaptation, and then also the book version of Needful Things. And so, this was the first appearance of Ace, which is kind of interesting. So the interesting thing here, more so than anything though, is the rats aspect. The rats. This dude has an instance where he sees all of these college kids start turning into rats. And you can kind of tell that even as far back as then, he was losing his grip of reality. And so it turns in the end, without getting super, super spoilery. I know I usually make these live discussions like total spoilery, but the thing about this is that it leaves it ambiguous as to how crazy the guy actually is, because it's like you wonder if there actually was a woman named Nona at all, because those truck drivers are like, when you were beating the hell out of that guy, and they're all testifying, when he's on trial, he's like, there was no woman there. Did he imagine her? Probably. He seems fairly nuts. And so Nona is a really dope story. It's not in my top 5 of these stories here, but it's definitely in the top 10, and it's one that I truly, truly appreciate the heck out of, man. It's really, really cool. So next up, we have, I have to briefly talk about The Mist, okay? Have to briefly talk about The Mist, because this technically is the one that came out next. It was collected in Dark Forces in 1980. Once again, the fact that I did an entire video about all of the versions of The Mist is something where I'm just like, okay, I don't want to, if I already dedicated like almost an hour to that video, I don't want to get too super retready. But upon this reread / re-listen, I definitely enjoyed the early dream that David's character has, where he dreams of God like wading through the lake, and how that corresponds with the arrival of the mist and all that. I thought that was pretty cool. Interesting stuff. I just like all the stuff with the Arrowhead Project and the Lovecraftian, like just opening up, doorways to these other worlds, like basically making their own thingy, and or there was one there already and they're exploiting it. Who the hell knows, And they're like, they wanted to peer in. And this is where I don't want to confuse certain aspects of like the book and the film adaptation specifically. Very faithful in comparison. Won't anybody see a lady home? Yeah, that was the scene that they like ripped word for word, and it's Carol from The Walking Dead. She delivers that line really, really awesomely. And everybody knows we have the stir crazy bunker paranoia and Norton's disbelief versus David's fear and the extent of that. I'm so amused by the stuff about the Flat Earth Society and like that little band of people in the grocery store who think that they're like, there's nothing out there. Everything's just fine. And King calls them the Flat Earth Society. I find that incredibly funny. I also dig where they hear this huge, like thunderous, like creature sound outside, and King describes it as being like, something you'd hear on the African belt or on, South American swamp or something of that nature. But really, the big thing that they don't transfer into the film that is a very interesting thing, which is here in this, is, do you know what talent is? The burden of expectation. And it's where, like, we have these internal monologues of David's character, our main guy, the dude. The Thomas James character in the film, everybody, our lead, the guy who's painting Roland, Death Chain, the gunslinger at the very beginning of the film, which I love that Easter egg. And but he's got these moments where he's describing his self-doubt and his disappointment about being a talented person and yet not as talented as he thought he would be, at least as far as accomplishments go. He's from a family of artists, and all of the burden of expectation and the talent and stuff. And, it's really fascinating in that regard, just to see that little subplot and that little internalization. I still don't like him sleeping with that lady when he still might have a wife alive. And King even mentioned it in the afterword when he's talking about it. He was like, yeah, I'm always regretful about the fact that, he cheated on his wife when she very well could have still been alive back at the house. They changed that in the movie for the better, in my estimation. I feel like it gives the character much more nobility and integrity, which I appreciate. But that's expiation. I love it. Okay, but there is one specific passage, page 101, that I wanted to read because it's very similar, in my estimation, to King's musing at the very beginning of the second part of Pet Sematary, where he's talking about how much fear can somebody actually, put themselves through and still maintain sanity. So third paragraph 101. So this is dope. I love this passage, everybody. Listen up. I realized with fresh horror that new doors of perception were opening up. New? Not so. Old doors of perception. The perception of a child who has not yet learned to protect itself by developing the tunnel vision that keeps out 90% of the universe. Children see everything their eyes happen upon, hear everything in their ears range. But if life is the rise of consciousness, as a cruel work sampler my wife made in high school proclaims, then it is also the reduction of input. Terror is the widening of perspective and perception. The horror was in knowing I was swimming down to a place most of us leave when we get out of diapers and in the training pants. I could see it on Ollie's face too. When rationality begins to break down, the circuits of the human brain can overload. Accents grow bright and feverish. Hallucinations turn real. The quicksilver puddle at the point where perspective makes parallel lines seem to intersect is really there. The dead walk and talk. A rose begins to sing. I love that passage. I think it is rad, statist, so very awesome. I already mentioned the adult triangle. It's a cool little thing to hear him calling this kid Big Bill, because we know, years later who, Big Bill would be not the same character, obviously. But yeah, the movie is darker and more definitive. The book does end with that lack of certainty, which, people have pointed out some of them personally prefer. And then the other portion. Okay. So this is another one that I really enjoyed. And this is at the end of the book, everybody. So, bear with me here. A shadow loomed out of the mist, staining it dark. It was as tall as a cliff and coming right at us. I jammed on the brakes. Amanda, who had been catnapping, was thrown forward. Something came again. That is all I can say for sure. It may have been the fact that the mist only allowed us to glimpse things briefly, but I think it's just as likely that there are certain things that your brain simply disallows. There are things of such darkness and horror, just I suppose as there are things of such great beauty, that they will not fit through the puny human doors of perception. I dig when King goes into this existential just processing of the most horrific and scary things, like beyond our imagination, and how people's brains just like shut off, you know? It's like, nope, didn't see that. Nope. That could not be real. That is out of the realm of reason. And so I really dig when he explores that reactionary aspect of people. So now that we've done some heavy lifting for a little bit, I feel like I do have to cruise back through the comments, get back to the live chat. Okay, so let's see. Okay, my eyes hurt from reading. Oh, Catherine's so funny. Okay, let's get caught up real quick before we launch into some more stuff here. Has there been a May Book of the Month announced? Well, the May Book of the Month, Andrew, none other than If It Bleeds. If It Bleeds was originally supposed to be coming out next Tuesday, but King pushed up the release date by 2 weeks. So I've already done a non-spoiler review, and I consulted everybody in the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. I was like, do you still want the May Book of the Month to be If It Bleeds? Because that means we won't be talking about it for like almost a month and a half, you know, when I asked the question about a week or so ago. And there's a lot of people who still don't have their copies of the book. There is one story in particular called The Life of Chuck that just needs spoiler discussion about it. In fact, Catherine actually wrote a big thing that I'm going to like give her thoughts on this on the show briefly when we do the Book of the Month for May. So yes, the May Book of the Month is If It Bleeds, but I don't know, the Blockade Billy, the anniversary is also, well, it was this past month for one edition, this month for the next edition. That won't be a live video though, so I don't know if anybody wants to seek out, Blockade Billy. I'm going to be doing a review this month for the anniversary of that. But yeah, as it stands, it's still going to be If It Bleeds. So, all right. Really loved The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands. I feel like King took the opening of the story, Group of Old Men from 81's Ghost Story. Yeah. Ghost Story by his buddy Stroud is one, Jared, that I've actually had a lot of people recommend to me. I picked up a paperback of it about a year or two ago, and I still have not gotten around to seeing it. To reading it. I know that they did a film of it that had like Fred Astaire and a few other people, but I've heard it diverts pretty drastically from the source material in a lot of ways. So, okay, Corey says, does Fuego force you to read Stephen King, Catherine? Yes, I have definitely forced her to read Stephen King. I will not deny that at all. Joe Exotic was hanging out in their spot. Yeah, that's funny, Mikey. That's pretty amusing. All right, the Gentleman's Club needs to be exploited more, or maybe a collection focusing on it. I think that would be cool, Dave. And the thing is, they've been trying to make it into a television series for a while. There is a film, allegedly, there is an IMDb for it and everything, of the breathing method, you know, that is supposed to explore. But yet, I also read that at one point there is a television show that was in development that was going to be all about that club specifically, the 240 or whatever the hell it is. I would have to consult the notes to double check. Whatever. Not important at this particular point. We shall get to it. But just trying to get the proper catch-ups going. Okay, Corey. All right. I see everyone is definitely jizz magic. Oh man. All right. Well, we are getting close to being caught up. I felt Nona was Contoy. That's interesting. It's an interesting theory. So as opposed to actually just being in his imagination, she was part of the Crimson King crew. That's interesting. I dig that, Kanto. It's actually very cool. Okay. Oh wow! Thank you so very much for the super chat, Corey. You are a badass, and all of us at the Horror Show, we're very stoked to have met you last year, man. Okay, I look forward to these book reviews every month. Well, any bit helps, and it's much appreciated. But I'm obviously this is a project of passion, man, and any donation is dope and super appreciated. But more so than anything, I'm just happy to be here with all of you peeps. So. The Mist is one of my all-time favorite novellas too. I'm almost caught up now. I prefer how the creatures are described in the novella rather than how they look in the movie, but I still love the movie as much as the story, says Mikey Mnemonic. Yeah, you know, I've contended that my preferred viewing of it in the black and white, it makes the dated CGI look a lot better, in my opinion, you know, so it's definitely something there. Okay, where are we at? Trying to get caught up so we can have some more discussion here. Darn, I really need to order If It Bleeds. Yeah, well, I mean, you have time now, right? That's the thing. I like Amazon and so many of these other, like, you know, people mailing out books, that like shipping, I think pretty much everywhere in the world has been like definitely stalled significantly because of everything that's going on. So, okay, Corey says, last time I went and tried to order If It Bleeds, it wasn't available on Amazon. Yeah, I had pre-ordered mine, but I specifically did not pre-order it on Amazon. Catherine had actually got me a Barnes & Noble gift card. It was like a leftover holiday gift or something. And she's like, you want this? I'm like, yeah. And so I pre-ordered If It Bleeds from Barnes & Noble. And I think it was like 3 or 4 days late as opposed to, you know, being here on the release date like was initially mentioned. So they seemed earthly in the film for me. Yeah, I can see that, Mikey. And the fact that, you know, they are, like, King really makes them seem the Lovecraftian, like, from another dimension, universe, whatever, in their description, which is something he also does pretty well in This Is Todd's Shortcut that I appreciate. So, okay. Oh, yeah, the CD edition of Blockade Billy, but never read it. Yeah, I have the Cemetery Dance edition. I don't have the one with the baseball card, though. That is definitely one that I would prefer to have. Tony T says, word processor of the gods was adapted good in the Tales from the Dark Side. Well, it was definitely adapted faithfully, Tony. I'm just not the biggest fan of that story, personally, you know, but that's obviously artist subjective, personal taste, but it's definitely one of the better versions of the adaptations and how that all goes. So JT Grogan put in a $5 super chat. Keep up the great work. I am humbled and honored to be here doing it. I feel like I'm doing the King's work, the Lord's work, or something silly like that. Anyway, we are all caught up, and so now we can catch back up with some more of these stories. Since I'm going through another talking fiction, check out this dope glass, guys. It's got like this like wizard-looking mofo on it. It's pretty rad. I got this at the Renaissance Fair a number of years ago. So in any event, here we go. Come along with me. And as King says at the very beginning, oh yeah, do you love? That's the thing. Do you love pops up in 2 different stories here, which I didn't even pick up on until this particular reading. It's in the Raft and it's in the Reach. And it's funny because I read those almost back to back because they were almost released like right around the same time. So next in our chronological release order, we have the monkey. And the monkey is one of the most iconic things because the damn monkey is on the front of this book, man. You know? I will be clear, though, that this is not one of my personal favorites, everybody. No. It's just too by the numbers for me. You know, it's way too much like various stories that I've read before where there's an evil object that it's not like physically doing anything, but there's the perception that it has an evil presence about it, and it is in turn orchestrating terrible things going down. That's really what this crazy, one of those like, you know, sort of like symbol monkey kind of things. You've seen tons of them. Obviously, everybody's seen one of these damn things. King actually had the idea for the story when he was in New York and he was doing some stuff with his publisher, and he was just like walking around the city, and he happened to see this guy who had a blanket laid out, and he had just like he had a big old bucket of flipping monkey, barrel of goddamn monkeys out there, and he apparently went back to his hotel room and just shorthand and you know, just wrote the whole story out over the course of like a night or two. And I mean, it's not poorly executed. It's just rather unimaginative in my estimation. Although it is, I mean, the best stuff here the King does, and you can tell he's really pulling a lot from his own childhood, you know, and the fact that the father had walked out, he's got an older brother, you know, the time period that it takes place in, or at least the flashback stuff does when this monkey is first discovered. And they try to get rid of the monkey, and the monkey keeps coming back. And so it's just one of those things. And he's back to settle the estate of his aunt that basically started taking care of him and his brother after, you know, his mother just randomly passed away, which is implied, you know, was the work of the monk And so they're back and they're trying to settle the estate. And there is an interesting quip that happens early on where the guy's like, it's like to paraphrase, it's about, death being a crummy reason for family members to reconnect. And that is sad, and it happens all the goddamn time. And it's a real tragedy in that regard, how families get splintered and then they're forced to deal with each other again and reconnect if there's somebody dead and you have an estate to settle and all of that other stuff. Money always brings people together, though, doesn't it? But there's this laundry list of presumed victims from this monkey back when our main character's a kid. You've got the babysitter who dies in this like shooting at her home. The mother's boyfriend like shoots a couple people. And then you've got the very peculiar deaths of both of the brothers' like best friends. Like one like falls to his death, and then the other one gets hit by a car. And then they do imply that yes, the mother was another victim. And then they even are like, did our father really run off, or could he have been a victim in his own right himself? Who the hell knows, man? And then they even imply that the aunt who adopted the brothers, is she the most recent victim? And so that's why they're back. He had thrown this monkey down into a well, and they discover it again. And so it's just too tropey for me. But I mean, I'm sure a lot of people like it just fine, But it's King's writing that saves this, more so than anything. The ideas, though, I do like the finale where they're trying to throw the monkey into this lake. And then there's like a little news story at the very end. It's like a clipping from like the Castle Rock newspaper or whatever. And it's like all fish in this particular lake have all gone bottoms up and died in this lake. And so that I thought was cool. So I did like the end, but really it's just a bit too tropey for my taste. So next up in publishing order, we have from the December of 1980. So The Monkey was November of 1980 in Gallery, and December of 1980 brought us The Wedding Gig, which was in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. This is another one that's it's good. I mean, for what it is, it's just a very simple story. Doesn't really entail a lot of horror. This is where we are reminded that King likes telling these like hard crime, like kind of mobster type tales. He's always been into this. It's why it's a genre he continues to return to as the years go on. And so this takes place in 1927 Illinois during Prohibition times. And there's this jazz band that is asked to go and play this Irish wedding. And apparently this Irish mobster guy, there's this Greek that he's been having these issues with. And it's really all told from this racist band leader's perspective. He drops an N-bomb. It's pretty fucking inappropriate, man. And I did not like that. It's something King does here and there that I really take exception to. But yeah, for me, the funniest bit is probably the way that King, it's almost described in a similar fashion to the barf out hot dog eating stuff in the body. Just the way he describes the bride and her size, I guess, her girth. That's definitely something. He describes the groom after this. So a shootout happens at this wedding, and it's all grisly for a little bit there and stuff. And then in the aftermath, this big, huge bride and this tiny little groom, that she's marrying is it's described as he's running around her. The groom running around the bride is like a moon orbiting a planet, and I'm just like, oh, King, you are so mean. And then he's describing her even having the wedding meal, and it's like, now she doesn't need a knife and a fork. She needs like a bulldozer or something like that. I'm like, oh my God, dude, take it easy. So it's short. It's very well narrated by Paul Giamatti, though, on the Audible. The two stories that Paul Giamatti did, he did a fantastic job. He really, really did. It's interesting to hear what happens with the bride afterwards, how she takes over her brother's business in the Prohibition era, and the people she kills and the notoriety that she gains. It's all pretty significant stuff. So The Wedding Gig is definitely, it's not bad. It's very enjoyable. It might be rather forgettable. It's not one of King's best, but it shows a side kind of just affinity that he still enjoys to this day. And so, it's a cool little story that I like. Definitely not one of my favorites, but still a nice change of pace in this collection, I guess. And so next up, we have the first of the unreleased stuff that had never been previously published that's in this book. And so they're there. You should probably rip this out to make it a little bit more easier as opposed to having to go back and forth with all you guys. But yeah, so the next one up is Milkman #1, Morning Deliveries. And the purpose for this story was essentially to give some backstory about who becomes the antagonist at the end of our next story. So previously published was Big Wheels, A Tale of the Laundry Game. And that's a story about, so there's these two drunk guys, and they're basically like cruising around the Pittsburgh area. And one is about to have his registration, be revoked because he can't pass emissions. There's all this different shit wrong with his truck or his big wheels, which they even describe them as at one particular point. This huge mammoth of a vehicle that he has. And so I believe his name is Rocky. And so he's just going around with this younger chum of his who works with him at the laundromat. They're getting drunk, and he happens in there cruising around to just come pass by this guy that he used to play basketball with, like way back when they were kids in school together. And so he's like, okay, I can coax this old buddy of mine to help me get through emissions, okay? And just give me a pass, even though my vehicle's all just beaten to shizzle and whatnot. And so they proceed to start reminiscing, and he gets his friend to start drinking. Apparently his friend has these homicidal thoughts about his wife, which just randomly is mentioned about halfway through the story, about how he hates his wife, and he's thought about strangling her and killing her in her sleep and all this other stuff, which after all the drunken reminiscing, dude proceeds to go and do. Like, that's what actually goes down. It's pretty nuts, man. And but aside from that happening, we also get some backstory from the Rocky character about this dude named Spike, who's the Milkman. And the Milkman, Spike, has apparently impregnated his wife with a third child at one particular point. And yeah, he was going to go do some real ill shizzle. He ends up in jail for a while. While he's in jail, she ends up leaving him and going and, living with the Spike guy and so on and so forth. And yeah, at the very end of this tale, Spike confronts our dude Rocky, and that's what goes down. But King decided that our dude Spike needed a backstory. And so that's what he wrote specifically for this, and it's very, very brief. It's only a few pages, but you find out Spike is a homicidal maniac. Seriously, the Milkman maniac is what I will call him. And so he's basically going around, and not only does he have a bloody meat hook in his vehicle, but beyond that, he's putting, like, as he's making his deliveries, he's putting, like, tarantulas in people's chocolate milk. He's putting acid gel in the all-purpose cream he's dropping off. He's putting belladonna in people's eggnog, for God's sake. I mean, cyanide gas in an empty milk bottle. And then, in turn, he even goes into this empty house that has, like, it's, like, completely unfurnished, and yet there is a big chunk of the wall missing that has like some scalp and hair still stuck in the hole, and there's blood and all this other stuff. So you can tell this guy has been up to some really, really ill stuff. And so it's interesting to get like a little bit of backstory about him before he goes and confronts Rocky in the second half of The Milkman. And I guess The Milkman was originally going to be its own novel, about this murderous delivery dude. And then King just, he hit some snags, and but the interesting thing about the first half of the Milkman story is the fact that King so delicately and sweetly describes like pretty much like 50s suburbia, and just it's this wonderful day, and the ant finds a piece of chocolate, and there's like squirrels running around, and the sun is beating down beautifully, and just all this different stuff. But he counterbalances all of this sweet like description of just the area and the environment and this town or whatever with the just very unabashedly horrible stuff that this sick mofo is doing. So it's an odd pair of stories that we get in this. I can't say they're personal favorites, but I definitely found them intriguing in that regard. And so yeah, that's just some brief thoughts about Big Wheels and the Milkman. So next we come to the one that apparently so many have an affinity for, and that I have gained a new one for, I must admit. And that's none other than the Jaunt. Jaunt is a reminder to me about how sad I am that Sai King doesn't really write science fiction anymore. He kind of does in one new story. Maybe I guess you would consider a particular entry in If It Bleeds Science Fiction, The Life of Chuck. It's got some science fiction-y kind of ideas of sorts, I guess. But the Jaunt is basically, it was originally published in the Twilight Zone magazine, if I remember correctly. Yes, Twilight Zone magazine, June of 1981. And so this one is all about the 24th century and how people go on these things called the jaunts, which are just terminology for teleportation. And so teleportation was apparently in this alternate King universe invented in the late 1980s. And it was this guy who was funded with government money, and he had his back to the wall. He was running out of it. He only had like X amount of computer time a day. And King also describes like in this alternate universe where, I mean, so much terrible stuff is going down. I mean, so you've got anarchy and starvation. You've got an energy crisis and people just freezing to death because, you know, they can't even heat their homes in certain areas of the United States. They talk about just the corruption of the oil barons and how eventually it goes from oil being the thing to water being the thing. And so, but really the framing device more so than anything is there is this family that is about to take a jaunt from Earth to Mars. And so the children have never gone on a jaunt before. I'm not sure if the wife had. I don't know if they mentioned one way or the other, but the father had gone on like 20-something jaunts. And so he is trying to just quell the fears and apprehensions of his children. And he does that by, as they are waiting in this, like, you know, basically like airport terminal kind of place, you know, they are about to be sedated because they're giving all these people the gas because apparently you need to be, you know, sedated when you go on these jaunts and stuff like that. And so the father, he basically, as he talks about the history of the jaunt and all the interesting aspects about how first, you know, the guy was working on mice and just the progression of this eccentric guy's research and how there was only one article published in Popular Mechanics magazine, and then the government swooped in and they took the technology for themselves. And, you know, he was relegated to like a hero / shunned eccentric of sorts. But yeah, and now there's apparently jaunt stations like all throughout the solar system. And they're sending drones out even to other neighboring solar systems in the galaxy, you know, trying to find habitable planets, you know, and all of this other stuff. And there's even people who have used jaunts for nefarious means, like, you know, to get rid of political evils and you know, political enemies. Mafia people have used illegal jaunts to like dispose of bodies and stuff like that. But I mean, it's very interesting in the fact that you start to wonder, like, just like this, the daughter asked, "What happened to the mice, Daddy?" You know, because he kind of circles around the topic, but just doesn't give the full explanation of it to his kids, you know, because they start to realize, they're like, okay, you know, when the dude was first attempting to get this technology finalized, you know, he was sending mice through and the mice were coming out dead. And so in turn, he eventually finds out, okay, we can put animals and in turn people through as long as they are not conscious. And so they first did these test runs on people, and it was all convicts, you know. 6 of the 7 convicts all came out okay. But the 7th one, he was apparently this convicted murderer and was on death row and whatever, and they were going to give him a second lease on life if he participated in this program. He jaunted for 2 miles, but for whatever reason, he wasn't properly sedated, whatever. So he was awake when he went through, and yet, and he came out on the other side, and he's conscious. Like, his hair was white, and he looked like an old man. And honestly, the jaunt has always reminded me of this particular episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where Barclay is going through the teleportation stuff that they use on Star Trek. You know, beam me up, Scotty, and all that different shizzle. And he sees, as he's teleporting, this weird creature that kind of comes at him as he's being teleported. It's a dope episode of TNG, personal favorite of mine, and that's what the jaunt has always given me vibes of. And yeah, so apparently, if you are you're awake when you go through, it is because, you know, in real time, it only takes like a fraction of a second to go from one place to another. But the actual extent of time through the transition process is innumerable. And the thing that was said by that convict guy was, it's eternity in there. And so it really gets into some dense, heady sci-fi stuff in this. And it just reminds me why I miss Stephen King telling these sort of stories. The twist is probably predictable at the end of this one, but nonetheless, I enjoyed the hell out of it. And it is interesting where they're talking about, like, oh, you could write a letter and you could jaunt it to the other side of the world, and you wouldn't have to worry about air and mail and all this other stuff. And I'm like, oh, well, good thing we figured out how to send emails and we developed the internet. That's just that idea just made me slightly amused. But yeah, this is the Jaunt is a representation of Stephen King sci-fi that I definitely miss, and I can see why so many people have an affinity for it. I hadn't read it in a number of years, and I'd forgotten just how much I dig the hell out of the Jaunt. It is really, really rad status. We are nearly halfway through. I know this is extensive, and this is why I was saying that I purposefully had done separate videos for all of those entries of Night Shift, just because of the fact that I knew that this was going to be like a lengthy undertaking, and yeah, so it just keeps rolling. Not to give any credit to the old Limpy Biscuits, but anyway. Okay, so Chris Bethel says we were going to bow out early. Got something cool planned. Bye, guys. Chris, if you tune into some of this later, gracias. Thank you so very much for coming. Word King possessed object, story of all time. Chattery T, who's with me? All right, still better than a fortune cookie. All right, so Dan had the piece out as well. Split everyone. Thanks, Fuego. Nope. I know these marathon discussions are they're lengthy, and there is a lot of ground to cover. And I appreciate everybody who is sticking around. So, okay, let the jaunting technically is what ultimately led to the world moving on again. It's just a theory I had, but I'm not sure if I agree with it. Interesting. Okay. So yes, there is a lot to wrap your head around and to discuss as far as the jaunt goes, man. But okay, so as we continue cruising along, the man who would not shake hands is the next one that we have to just briefly touch on. And so this was written right around the same time as the breathing method. It deals with that same group of just high-end guys in 249B. It is the tale, not he who tells it. Now, breathing method was the story told in this same high-end New York club about this woman who was pregnant. She was on a taxi. She was on her way to have her delivery, and her head was chopped off in a car accident, yet she still birthed the baby. It's crazy. This one, however, is about this guy who is overseas, and he basically has something go down where he can't shake anyone's hands, and he claims initially that it's because of sanitary issues and whatever, and it comes to light when he participates in this high-stakes poker game in this club way back in the 20s, post-World War I. And so he wins this big pot, and then in turn, the dude, even though he had said he doesn't like to shake anyone's hands, the dude who was right there neck and neck with him, about to maybe get the money, or at least so he thought, loses to him and just goes and instinctually goes and shakes the man's hand. Man freaks out, runs away, and we eventually get the full extent of why he really won't shake hands. And yet, this is a tale that I have to criticize at least a little bit, because despite the writing and the fact that I like the dialogue and just the sitting beside the fire, and also I really dig the fact that the dude who's actually telling the story, he talks to the butler and he's like, was that your grandfather that was waiting on me back then, and so on and so forth? And the guy's like, of course it was. And he's like, you have a mole on that same spot on your face. And so I definitely wonder what is up with this butler, if it's some sort of ghostly presence, or what he is. And that's something to wrap your head around theory-wise. But I mean, my problem with this story, more so than anything, is the fact that what happens in the end and what actually ends up finishing everything off is you find out that this guy had run over a child when he was overseas, and so he was cursed. And he was cursed that anything whose hand he shakes will die. Okay? And so after the guy storms out of this poker game that he had just won without his money, he's trying to be tracked down because they want to give him his money. They end up finding him. And when they find him, he's dead. He's dead having shaked his own hand. My issue with this, though, is where it's like, but did he never wash his hands? Just a thought, guys. But that's why this story, I have a lot of friends and CRs that are big fans of it. But this one just wasn't for me. Another one that really wasn't particularly for me is our next tale, which, I actually have to jump ahead one real quick to the tale that makes me cry. It is technically the last story in the book, and Do You Love? It was originally called Did the Dead Sing, and it's The Reach. And this is about a 95-year-old woman who is in the twilight of her life. She's about to die, and she has lived on this goat island the entire life of hers, all 95 years, nearly a century on the same island, never having gone to the mainland, ever. So she's just been content and happy. Things are brought over for her, whatever. She's content, she's fine. And she randomly decides that it's time, and it's because she has cancer, and she is about to die. And it's very heartbreaking in that regard. And she sees a frozen sparrow one particular point, and she's like, man, the last time I saw a sparrow freeze when it was just flying around was the last time the Reach froze over. And so the Reach, and the term the Reach, is a body of water that basically separates an island from a mainland area where, it's deep enough and big enough, where, ships can go across and all this other stuff. And so, yes, the Reach does in fact freeze over. And, there's this talk about how the wind is calling her name, and she starts seeing, old friends, her husband, but not her husband as he was before he died. It's back when he was in the prime of his life. And, it's a very main story. It's a very, very main story, and there's the discussion about how, the people in Maine watch out for their own when there's a very brief segue into molestation accusations with these three girls, and how this man with missing fingers who they couldn't convict him or whatever. And so these main people, including Stella, our main character's husband, went and killed him. So that's the thing. And then there's this other quip where she's like, us people in Maine are basically like, if you eat well, if you fed the cancer, it would leave you alone. So that's this weird sentiment, how she's just, even though she knows the end is near, she's just trying to eat as much as possible, and so that's a thing. But really, this story just makes me just so teary-eyed every time when it's described her finally crossing the Reach, crossing over, and obviously passing away. And it's a beautiful story. It's a sad story. It was originally published in Yankee in November of 1981, and it's one that it's not a horror story. It's just one of those haunting, sad tales. And if I was ever to do a Dollar Baby, this is the one that I would want to adapt and direct for our crew here on the horror show. I love this story. Tears me up, makes me sad. And there you have it, folks. But okay, so next up we have another one that I'm not supremely fond of, and that's Survivor Type. Survivor Type is about this college football star turned surgeon, turned disgraced license lost surgeon for having illegal meds racket, who somehow gets himself into smuggling heroin on this ship. Ship goes down. He ends up marooned on this small island that has no food of any kind on it. And he slowly starts eating himself. This was going to be an episode of the first season of Creepshow on Shudder. It was apparently going to be too high budge for them to adapt. And so, yeah, they ended up abandoning that. Who knows, maybe since the show is successful, if they'll think about it for season 2. But yeah, it's about this guy who he eats a seagull at one point, but there's no food of any kind there. And so he eventually gets desperate enough to start amputating pieces of his body and eating them. Yeah, it's one of those kind of stories. And, it's not particularly bad. It's just silly in my estimation. I mean, the best stuff really is like him looking back on his life and how he got to the point that he had, this alcoholic father who dies young, the fact that the only way to get out of the projects, in New York, was to play football, and just like hearing about his story. And also as he gets hungrier and hungrier and he's starting to lose his mind and he's like thinking about all kinds of different food and, lasagna and prime rib and all this other stuff. I mean, it's amusing, but really, I mean, he's basically as an anesthetic, he's basically taken the heroin to numb himself up enough to cut these pieces of his body off a foot and then another foot and then, some of my leg and all this other stuff. But it's just such an over-the-top story. I don't know. It's novel in its own regard. I know there's some people who think it's hilarious. It's definitely of like a darkly comedic variety. Let's put it that way. And once again, it's not a personal favorite, but it's a nice change of pace, I suppose. But then we have The Raft, man. And The Raft is one of my absolute favorites in this collection, in my top 5. Gruesomely adapted, as I mentioned earlier, for Creepshow 2, the second segment there. And so you've got, you've got the jock and the geek. You've got Deke and I'm trying to remember his name, Randy, maybe something like that. Anyway, but Cisco and Pancho. It's a very simple story, and it's just a classic monster story. It's about these 4 kids. College kids, they go out to this remote place that has all of these do not trespass, all fences and different stuff to go through. And it's this lake that has this raft in the center. It's one of those, Indian summer days in October. They want to go swim. And there is a man-eating oil slick there that proceeds to devour these kids. And yet the interesting thing that they only hint at very briefly in the adaptation that they do here is that besides being just bloodthirsty and wanting to eat these people, is that it also has these glimmering colors that are hypnotic. And that's actually what gets the first girl, is her just staring into the colors and stuff. And then the second guy who dies, though, Deke, who is the jock dude, there's a scene where Stephen King says Deke loses his fear cherry because, he's a football player, he's stout and tough, and, nothing will scare me. And after the first girl gets eaten by this thing, then, Deke has lost his fear cherry and he's legitimately scared. And that guy's death he is pulled through the raft. He is pulled through the wooden planks, and it happens, it's pretty quick in the film, and it's still gruesomely done, and I appreciate the effects, but it is a slow process in this. And the 2 surviving people at that moment, at least, just watch him start with his leg, and his leg is pulled through, and then the other leg gets pulled up, and then his arms are up, and he's alive for a little bit of it, and then he's dead. And even though he's dead, the thing is still slowly pulling his body through, and as his arms go up from to like this to he's signaling a touchdown to it's really grotesquely gruesome, and I commend King. This was originally a short story called The Float that he had published in 1969, but he got arrested for stealing cones or something, from street cones, city street cones, when he was drunk one night. And he apparently never got a copy of the story, never was able to find it, even though he was paid $250 for it and helped pay his fines for these silly drunken shenanigans. But apparently he had never been able to find a copy. So when he was on Creepshow working on the set, he just started diddling around with this story again, and he ended up just reworking it and having it published. And it is just classic King horror. I love The Raft. It is so badass, man. And obviously, besides being collected here in November of '82, you had it in Gallery magazine. So here you go. There you go. Then you got Word Processor of the Gods, and this is one that I'm not going to really focus upon too much, because, like I said, I did a review of both the short story and in the Tales from the Dark Side episode, which it's a solid adaptation. It's about this guy who's a struggling writer, and his nephew makes him a word processor. His nephew passes away. He always had much more of an affinity for this nephew in comparison with his own child. And so, it's just fun, but it's one of those stories that, once again, is too tropey for me. It's too similar to things that I've seen before, because all he has to do is type into this word processor and press execute, and he can either make things go away or he can bring them into existence. And so he asks for a picture on his wall to disappear, and then he asks for bags of gold to appear on his floor. And then he decides he wants to delete his family. So, simple story, but the reason I'm kind of critical of it is because of the fact that I'm pretty positive Stephen King saw the episodes of The Twilight Zone called A World of His Own and Printer's Devil. A World of His Own was about a dictation machine that could bring things into existence and take them away. And Printer's Devil was about this printing press, something that you would produce newspapers and magazines from, that if you wrote something down, it happens, basically, it comes to fruition. It can either, take things away, bring them into existence, whatever. And it's also very similar to Obits, which is a really cool short story that Stephen King did back in, phone's ringing. Terrible. But yeah, so Obits is a great story from Bizarre Bad Dreams, which was all about this guy who, if he wrote somebody into the obituaries, they would die in the exact fashion in which that, they had passed. And so that's, it's just not a personal favorite, guys. It is what it is. And I'm trying to remember if Word Processor of the Gods was Twilight Zone, the new Twilight Zone, or if it was Tales from the Dark Side. Pretty sure it was Tales from the Dark Side. But yes, this is published in Playboy magazine, January of 1983, I believe. Yep, exactly. And King felt all prestigious, being in the classiest men's magazine. So there's only a few stories left here, guys. Uncle Otto's Truck. This was done in October 83 for Yankee. This is another one of those living car stories. So Uncle Otto's Truck is about, these two gentlemen who went into business together. One of them died mysteriously. Dude claimed that it was the truck. And, everybody in the town, and I believe that, this is Castle Rock story as well. Everybody, it's like gossip is always a hot item in a small town. And it's a theme that King touches on a few times in this particular story. And, so this guy, he goes and just starts losing his sanity because he's positive that this vehicle is alive, and his nephew, who was the one who was actually telling the story, is trying to take care of his presumably zany and crazy uncle, bringing him food, doing all this other stuff. But he slowly starts to kind of be convinced that maybe there is something with that vehicle. And it's just very short, simple, to the point. Uncle ends up dying, and when they find the uncle dead, he's got quarts of motor oil in his body. And so you figure, the vehicle obviously had something to do with it. And he even asks his uncle at one point before he dies, he's like, why don't you just go? Why are you sitting, living right beside this vehicle? What's the deal, man? And he's like, sometimes a man has to stay in one place and wait for it to come to him, So obviously we've got Christine vibes here that was published the same year. It's a good story, it's nice in its simplicity, but it's not a personal favorite. So any of these stories that I can compare to another King story that was released around the same time, I'm going to be a little less fond of and a little more critical of, I kind of have to be. Now we come to one that's actually very unique, and yet I did a whole episode about it before. This is the aforementioned Grandma, produced, initially put in Weird Book, spring 1984. And Grandma is basically, it's about this kid who was left home alone with his grandmother because his older brother broke his leg playing baseball. And so mom has to go and get involved in, making sure the kid's okay at the hospital and all that other stuff. But his grandma is apparently very old, very fat, and very scary in this kid's estimation. And yet she's sleeping. So he's like, okay, everything will be okay. But he's worried that if she wakes up, and of course, being a kid, the imagination is running wild. And he's theorizing about all the different bad things that could transpire, with Grandma under his watch. But the most fascinating stuff about this story for me is the presumed history of the grandmother and the fact that she was barren and she kept miscarrying, she couldn't have children, and then apparently she consulted some special books, and then she's suddenly able to start having children. And so there is an implication that she was involved in some dark arts of some sorts, because apparently the church finds out, and so her and her husband get excommunicated, and yet they have a brood of children by that particular point. There's a sentiment in this story, though, that God sometimes plays dirty, which I thought was interesting. But there's also the whole grandma's having one of her bad spells. And as the kid starts to really realize, as he's turning over things in his head, the extent of power and evil that his grandmother could potentially possess, it's interesting, man. The movie Mercy with Carl Chandler Riggs or Briggs or whatever the heck his name is. I wasn't particularly fond of it, even though it was a Blumhouse movie. It tried to sympathize the grandmother and turn her into not quite the evil that she is. She is evil incarnate in this story. And the end of her taking over the body of the kid, lie down in the name of Hastur, which is, I guess, Cthulhu mythos crazy shizzle. So that's something cool to keep in mind. This story is unique, and this story I really like. This is totally one of the stronger entries in this collection, and I really, really, truly appreciated it. And there's only a couple Only a couple left, everybody. We've almost finished this crazy journey. I have to give Dave Edmonds a shout out. He says, time for me to go. Fantastic chat. Take care, everyone, and thanks for the great content, Jaime. Yes, I know spending this much time with me is extensive, and we all have real lives and stuff. Dave, thank you so very much. And grande gracias, dude, for tuning in. And I greatly appreciate the support, man, and all the cool palaver that we have had on the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. So, Riggs, thank you for correcting me, Mikey. I always forget it's Briggs or Riggs or something like that. Chandler, Riggs, Carl, that's right. So, our last few stories that we have here as we finish things up today is going to be, first off, one of my, the other one that's in my top 5. And that is Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. I had read this many times before, just listened to it again today, and yeah, it's an interesting one, man. This is another Castle Rock story, but this is one that is very, very much about thinnies and like dimension jumping and stuff like that. It's like, I mean, the phrase that is uttered a few times is there are holes right in the middle of things. And yes, that has a sexual reference as well. But nonetheless, this is all about this woman named Ophelia Todd, obviously. And she is just cruising around in her little vehicular, you know, from Castle Rock to Bangor and stuff. And she's a summer resident, so, you know, she's not there like year-round or anything like that. The story is told by this older guy named Homer, who is a year-round guy, helps take care of their property and stuff like that. But Ophelia is all about finding shortcuts, and this is apparently based off of King's wife, from what he says in the afterword and stuff like that. And so she has this little ticker that she can set on her vehicle that shows at the beginning of a journey the extent of distance that she has traversed in miles. And so she's always trying to find quicker ways to get to Bangor, and she apparently starts finding these secret roads, as she calls them. And so she is getting to places as the story goes on, quicker and quicker and quicker. And it's just interesting when you start to realize the extent of what these roads are. And it really happens when the amount of distance she's traversing in the short actual, mileage, it defies reason. That's when you start realizing, oh, she's finding like weird, like portals to other dimensions and stuff, like these secret roads that are allowing her to get to places like in ridiculously quick amounts of time. And I've spoken in various videos about my affinity for this short story. You get a Cujo reference, which is cute and stuff like that. But really, as she starts finding these secret roads and stuff, it starts de-aging her. Like the wrinkles are disappearing, the gray in her hair is going away, you know. And they have an interesting discussion at one particular point where she's talking with Homer about, you know, what's the fastest way from point A to point B on a map? And they're like, well, you have to go, straight line, whatever. And she's like, well, what if I could take the map and I could fold it in a little bit? So as opposed to having to go this distance, I only have to go this distance. You know, you take the paper and you fold it. It's really interesting. I dig that concept, you know. And then also where Homer is investigating her vehicle one time where she's made the, like 100-something mile drive and like it says only like 30-something miles on there. And he's looking at her vehicle and there is like moving like vegetation that is like alive, like weird living vines. Like if you've ever read The Ruins, from Scott Smith, that's a thing. And then there's this weird like half woodchuck, weasel looking thing with like what appears to be like venomous claws and stuff stuck in her grill. So wherever she is going, there is some very odd wildlife there, I gotta say. And so I dug that part too. And so I don't know. This is a story that it's another Castle Rock story that I hold in high regard. I have a big affinity for this story. And if you have never read Mrs. Todd's Shortcut before, it is a blast. It is a ton of fun. And we are on to just our last couple entries here, y'all. Ballad of the Flexible Bullet is one that I had not reread in quite a while. I don't know if I had reread this story since the first time I had purchased this book and read it. So we're talking probably about 8 years ago since I had read Ballad of the Flexible Bullet, which was originally published in the magazine of Fantasy and Sci-Fi in June of 1984. And this one is a trip. It deals with some of those same vibes that we get in the short story N, which I guess is technically probably classified as a novella. And it's about if insanity can be contagious, contagious madness, basically. And so it's said very early on in this dinner party that is going on between young, new, successful writer and his wife, the agent of the writer and his wife, and then the magazine editor who is going to be publishing, you know, a work from this up-and-comer, you know. This is obviously King going back to just writing what he knows and just recollections of when he was, you know, a fresh writer with a successful first novel and all this other stuff. So it's King doing that sort of thing. But I like the idea discussed here of, you know, madness being a kind of mental suicide, and just all of the stuff that it explores with this story that the editor starts to tell about this great piece that he was going to publish in the magazine that he used to work for back when he was like a major alcoholic and it was destroying his life and everything. But he gets this story called The Ballad of the Flexible Bullet, and it's about this guy who goes crazy and like kills his wife and child and stuff. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that'll brighten up your day. But so he contacts the guy who has, after the success of his first novel, moved from New York to like somewhere remote. I think it's like Oklahoma or something like that. He gets in contact with this guy through letter, and he's like, I want to publish your story. Awesome, whatever. And the guy's like, okay, yeah, I'll let you publish it. That's fine. But then he signs it with like the eye in the pyramid, like on the back of money, which I know has like some all kinds of, you know, Illuminati. And we're not going to open up that can of worms, everybody. But he also says, fornit sum fornis. Apparently this guy believes that there are these things called fornit elves, and they have a lucky fornis dust, which is what basically allows him to write and be creative. He's got a little elf that's living in his typewriter, and he has to feed it and all this other stuff. And so our narrator, this magazine editor, he indulges the guy initially in the course of trying to coerce him to, you know, allow him to publish the story. But the madnessness, like just the insanity, is almost transferred to this editor guy. And so he starts to believe a lot of this stuff. And he's drinking more, and he's getting crazier and more eccentric and all of this other stuff. It's really, I mean, it's from the alcoholic standpoint, which is really prevalent in this story, especially as this guy starts like talking about blackouts and how it's one thing to drink until you pass out. It's another thing to drink until you black out because you keep doing things that you don't remember, and you only get a couple of those one way or the other. And it's intense, man. It really, really is with this particular story. And being, this was published in what, 84, as we just said. It was only a few years later where King was going to be confronted by friends and family, and maybe he saw the warning signs already. You know, he did, and it's a sad story in a lot of ways, but it's also interesting because of the fact that you get the vibe that there actually are these weird little elf mofos, and yes, were they there? Weren't they there? You have to read the story to find out. I hope a lot of you did. Did someone say Illuminati? And then lastly, and this was the most recently published one here in this particular, this is from Weird Tales, and it came out in the fall of 1984, and that's none other than Beach World. Beach World is a short, interesting little sci-fi ditty that was read by Michael C. Hall, none other than Dexter. That's right. And it's basically about these couple guys who crash land on this like sand planet, basically this beach world of sorts. But it's rife with dark humor, and it's essentially this planet they're on. It's got like this sentient sand of sorts, and yet there's references to everything from surfboards to the Beach Boys. A rescue crew comes to get them, and yet one of the guys has gone completely mad, and he's like taking off his suit, and he's like barely clothed, and he's like eating handfuls of sand, and he refuses to go with them. An android robot that they have there, that they apparently call them Andes, it starts malfunctioning on this planet. They find sand inexplicably in the ship, even though there's no way it could have gotten in there. It's just a very different and just distinctive thing in this collection. It's like nothing King has ever written before. And that's where I just have to, you know, on this closing note, as we're nearly wrapping things up here, I have to say that I miss Sai King writing this sort of stuff. I miss him writing science fiction. And if there's any genre, Andy, yes, if there's any genre that I would love to see him return to more, it's writing this sort of science fiction, doing stuff like Beach World, doing stuff like the Jaunt, because as the years have gone on, he's really kind of stepped away from doing that sort of stuff, you know, which is really disappointing in that regard, because I think it's pretty dope, man, you know. And there are two other stories in here. One is called For Owen, and it's just like a sweet little thing about his son Owen, and like, you know, walking with him to school and stuff like that. And then The other thing is what I want to end our proceedings with today by reading. And it's very brief, so I won't be taking up too much of your time here, but there is something called Paranoid, a Chant. And I read this to Catherine the other day, and she was laughing about it, but it is weird. This is definitely, in my estimation, the extent of King in the midst of all of his excess of drinking and drugs and craziness and all of that. Paranoid, a Chant is something else. Check it out, y'all. I can't go out no more. There's a man by the door in a raincoat smoking a cigarette. But I've put him in my diary, and the mailers are all lined up on the bed, bloody in the glow of the bar sign next door. He knows that if I die, or even drop out of sight, the diary goes and everyone knows. CIA's in Virginia. 500 mailers bought from 500 drug counters each, one different. 500 notebooks with 500 pages in every one. I am prepared. I can see him from up here. His cigarette winks from just above his trench coat collar. And somewhere, there's a man on a subway sitting under a black velvet ad thinking my name. Men have discussed me in back rooms. If the phone rings, there's only dead breath. In the bar across the street, a snub-nosed revolver has changed hands in the men's bathroom. Each bullet has my name on it. My name is written in back files and looked up in newspaper morgues. My mother's been investigated. Thank God she's dead. They have writing samples and examine the back loops of P's and the crosses of T's. My brother's with them. Did I tell you? His wife is Russian, and he keeps asking me to fill out forms. I have it in my diary. Listen. Listen. Do listen. You must listen. In the rain at the bus stop, black crows with black umbrellas pretend to look at their watches, but it's not raining. Their eyes are only silver dollars. Some are scholars in the pay of the FBI. Most are the foreigners who pour through our streets. I fooled them. Got off the bus at 25th and Lex, where a cabbie watched me over his newspaper. In the room above me, an old woman has put an electric suction cup on her floor. It sends out rays through my light fixture, and now I write in the dark by the bar sign's glow. I tell you, I know. They sent me a dog with brown spots and a radio cobweb in its nose. I drowned it in the sink and wrote it up in folder gamma. I don't look in the mailbox anymore. The greeting cards are letter bombs. Step away! God damn you, step away! I know tall people. I tell you, I know very tall people. The luncheonette is laid with talking floors, and the waitress says it was salt. But I know arsenic when it's put before me, and the yellow taste of mustard to mask the bitter odor of almonds. I've seen strange lights in the sky. Last night, a dark man with no face crawled through 9 miles of sewer to surface in my toilet, listening for phone calls through the cheap wood with chrome ears. I tell you, man, I hear. I saw his muddy handprints on the porcelain. I don't answer the phone now. Have I told you that? They're planning to flood the earth with sludge. They are planning break-ins. They have got physicians advocating weird sex positions. They are making addictive laxatives and suppositories that burn. They know how to put out the sun with blowguns. I pack myself in ice. Have I told you that? It obviates their infrascopes. I know chance and I wear charms. You may think you have me, but I could destroy you any second now. Any second now. Any second now. Would you like some coffee, my love? Did I tell you I can't go out no more? There's a man by the door in a raincoat. Stephen King was nuts, man. I tell you, love him. Love him. But, yeah. That's the ending of our proceedings today, and what a note to go out on, right? I extend a grande gracias. I've been Jaime and Fuego. Y'all can find Wa on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Here on YouTube, I do have a separate solo channel. It's less than 30 subscribers from hitting a Jeezy, hitting 1,000. I cover all kinds of nerd-tastic stuff over there, non-spectacular, you know. So Star Wars, science fiction, indie art house dramas and things of that nature. Some action movies, you know, just basically anything that wouldn't fit into, you know, stuff here on the horror show. So if you have any interest, I would greatly appreciate jumping over, doing a like, a subscribe, and share of this video here. Obviously, like, share, and subscribe here if you are just tuning in on the horror show. Once again, reminder, book of the month for May is back over there. You can kind of see it, I guess. Right there. Yeah, that's right. We'll just kind of give it a little bit more credence. Yeah, there we go. Yes, it's none other than If It Bleeds, which I already have a spoiler-free review of up on the channel, but it's going to be a full-on spoiler discussion. One story in particular entitled Life of Chuck needs deep discourse and discussion. There's also good stuff to talk about with Rat, with the dude's phone, like Bradigan's phone, whatever that, Bradigan's phone. Anyway, and also the title story, If It Bleeds. So look forward to that. If you have any interest in further palaver, consult the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. That's where we have just daily palaver, all kinds of dope discourse and discussion about Sai King and the rest of his family. But I guess until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, everybody, gracias and hasta luego, amigos, and constant readers and viewers alike. Greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. Shout out to everybody from the Hail Ka-Tet that made an appearance. Y'all are greatly appreciated. And I guess until next time, peeps, remember, stay scared and read Stephen King. Hooray. Appreciate y'all so very much. And I need to turn this off. Oh, you're seeing behind the scenes. Oh, boy. Laters.